Hello YouTube, welcome to Alibro Production, the dark truth behind CCP, Ep.3. I would like to start by mentioning the Mongolian student protest in northern China against the central government, the CCP government. The CCP government have ordered an end to Mongolian language teaching in the ethnic Mongolian region in China. This sounds very much like the culture genocide against the indigenous culture in Canada like a century ago. So the ethnic Mongolian students rise up to protest against the educational department's order. And guess what? The authorities sent in police to crack down the protests and have many students arrested. And it has been reported that at least one student died out of the protest. Well, I think for many people who are familiar with Chinese politics, this is not surprising at all. I mean, look at how they did to the Uyghurs. Like millions of people got sent to concentration camp. The CCP is a fascist group. I mean, like, look at what they did to their own history. I mean, they destroyed the Confucius statue. They burned many Chinese classic books. I mean, in the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s to 1970s, they have been basically they have the whole generation of Chinese intellectual killed or imprisoned, in which I think they impose a culture genocide on themselves, on their own culture. How could you expect they are gonna respect the ethnic culture inside of China? No way. Now, I think these are known to many people, but here's my question for you. What do you think the average Chinese take on this, on the Mongolian student protests, on the Uyghur concentration camp, or on Hong Kong street protests against CCP government? Do you think they support the CCP government and believe that this crackdown is in the best interest of the majority Chinese people? This is the topic I would like to focus on for this episode. How do you understand the 1.4 billion Chinese people under CCP's control? Well, I would like to talk about the public opinions about Mongolian student protest. If take a look at if you know Chinese and take a look at the comment section of the news and on social media, chances are gonna find that a lot of people against the protest and support the CCP government. Are they the true public opinion? Of course not. So for those who haven't heard about the 15 cents army, I have to explain what they are. Basically, they are a bunch of people who got paid to leave comments in favor of whatever the government is doing and against whatever the government is against. And for each comment, they got paid for 50 cents. So guess like in order to make a living, they have to work very hard and make it into a full-time job. And God knows how many people are doing this kind of job. And I don't think they are just freelancing. Actually, they are well organized and they can orchestrate the attack at certain news, at certain opinions that are not favorable to the CCP regime inside of China and as well as outside of China. This tactics is very deceiving, I have to say, and they've been very successful in fooling people in China and people in the West. CCP understand that you are skeptical about the official news outlet like Xinhua Agency or People's Daily, but you might have the tendency to believe the random comments on social media, on the internet. China have the most sophisticated online censorship in the world, and so many people are hired to delete the comments that are deemed sensitive and keep those made by the 50 Cent army. Here's the thing, because of this practice of meddling the public opinions, it is hard even for the Chinese to understand what the real public opinion are like. I mean, for me, for myself, of course, I totally opposed to the CCP in what they are doing against the ethnic groups. I mean, I got so emotional watching these young hopeless Mongolian students are protesting, but then they were like pinned down on the ground and beaten up by police. I mean, they have the rights to have their own culture, and that's terrible to have their rights taken away from them. I have empathy in what these Mongolian students are doing, because like when I was in China, I feel very much oppressed by the CCP government culturally, politically, and economically. I would like to see a multiculturalism happening in China. I would like to see, I mean, there are so-called 56 ethnic groups in China. I would like to see the equality of the fair treatment of these minorities. I mean, in China they call the indigenous people as minority. Okay, they don't call them First Nation or whatever. They call it minority, which means, hey, we are the majority, you are the minority. You gotta listen to us. By using the term minority to refer to these ethnic groups, immediately create a divide between the ethnic groups and the majority Han Chinese. Well, this division is not natural. It's not how as an average Chinese would feel. It is actually the CCP's policy, and they name it that way so that whatever bad things the CCP are doing to protect their own culture hegemony, it is in the name of the majority of the Chinese people. So these ethnic groups, I mean, I can understand like quite a number of them hate Han Chinese. Yes, they hate Han Chinese, and it is really unfortunate, and they should be hating the CCP government, and so do we, so do Han Chinese. We and the minorities are not enemies. We didn't approve the CCP government to do things like that. We are sick of it. The CCP is a fascist group, and there's no democracy. They are not the representatives of people's power. Okay? There are people that I know have been deceived by CCPs and got a false image, a false understanding of the Chinese people, the 1.4 Chinese billion people. When you watch the Chinese president's state visit to the United States, what you're gonna see is a lot of Chinese holding flowers, a national flag, waving at President Xi in support of him in New York. I mean, like, these people are all hired to do that. I mean, some of them are international students in the States. Some of them are just paid to be present. Well, last year when the Hong Kong protests have just started, the CCP government hired quite a lot of innocent-looking elderlies from Guangdong province, put them in a bus and sent them to Hong Kong streets and have them holding banners and flags in support of the central government and condemning the local students, Hong Kong students. While these elderlies, they speak Cantonese and they could pretend to be Hong Kong citizens. And they deliberately, the organizer deliberately sent them to a place where they can find foreign media outlets. The CCP have done so many things in faking an image and public opinion, and the Western media seem to know very little about it, or they know but they don't want to talk about it. If all these fake images are removed, you will see the true character of Chinese people, and I believe it will be a much more positive image that you will see. I believe there are many Chinese people out there just like me who are very sympathetic about what's going on in those ethnic Mongolian schools. How do I know? Of course, I don't have a statistics, but people like me don't have a voice. I would say most people who can have their voice heard with regard to China are to some extent complicit or directly serving as a proxy for the CCP government. Years ago, I wrote in my blog a film review about Kondo, the story of Dalai Lama. I quickly got some very nasty comments, even threatening to kill me. I was intimidated and I deleted it. I mean, you can give it a try, you will realize how difficult it is to publish an essay or something that is critical against the CCP government today, especially in Canada. What I'm trying to say is that my people like me, our voices have been silenced. That's why we become invisible. You didn't see us when you think about the Chinese people. All you can see is the fake public opinion created by CCP, and therefore you might have miscalculated what the Chinese people are like. I would like to invite you to a perspective to see the Chinese people as victims kidnapped by the CCP. The Chinese people are not the one who do bad things against these ethnic groups in China, or the one who have been exploiting the people in Africa or Latin America or even in the West. You have to differentiate the CCP government from the Chinese people. In a state of dictatorship like CCP regime, the benefit they are getting, the money, the power they are getting, have nothing to do with the average Chinese people. They have all gone into the pockets of the CCP elite ruling families. In China, I don't feel that my life have been improved due to the China rises, due to the rapid increasing GDPs. The wealth of a nation does not trickle down to the grassroots levels. It stays within the corruption circle of the top CCP leaders. For example, the Vice President Wang Qishan is said to have $1 trillion US. Besides corruptions, the CCP government are not willing to spend money on the welfare of the Chinese people. Instead, they spend it on military, they spend it on espionage, and they spend it on the censorship and building this most sophisticated internet control is very costly, and they are very generous in that kind of spending. The interest of CCP is actually in conflict of the average Chinese people. So the CCP does not represent the Chinese people, and the Chinese people should not be understood through CCP, through their government. The last thing I want to add is that the Chinese people should not be understood through their culture icons or celebrities or public figures that are well known to the West. Why? Because many, I wouldn't say all, but the majority of these people have to be complicit with the CCP, because the CCP is all controlling. And in order to surface as a successful person, either in the culture sector or in business sector, you have to be complicit or serving the CCP. Ai Weiwei, the most well-known Chinese contemporary artist, is one of them, according to Miles Guo. Ai Weiwei appeared to be a critic against the Chinese regime, but he might have flipped side recently. This is another CCP's tactics to fool the public opinion through culture icons. They work on the dissidents or culture critics against CCP, and through torture, blackmail, intimidation, or using money to change them, because the CCP would ask them to continue to criticize CCP in general, such as the violation of human rights, but they have to say something to help the CCP at some critical issues at a critical time. For example, the former Voice of America journalist Gong Xiaoxia, when she came to America, she was a young dissident, and she's very vocal against China's records, human rights records. And she's been critical against it, and she got credibility. And therefore, she became a VOA journalist. And right before the China's entering the WTO, Gong Xiaoxia made a very long speech at the United Nations, stating the reason why China, the communist China, should be accepted. Her voice was understood as the voice of the Chinese people, as if the Chinese people want to enter WTO, but actually, in fact, it is the CCP who want to get into WTO. This is just an example to show that public figures, celebrities, or experts with regard to China's issue are more often than not seemingly opposing CCP, but actually under the table they are working or complicit with CCP. These kind of people should not represent the Chinese people. Okay, for the people who are real, who are genuinely against the CCP and genuinely doing in the best interest of the Chinese people, could not survive in China. I mean, for example, the Nobel Prize winner Liu Xiaobo, he could not make his voice heard after he was imprisoned. All right. However, look at Ai Weiwei. He have all this freedom to travel around China and make comments against CCP. That's hardly possible if he were not complicit with the CCP. This is all I have to say for this episode. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you next time. Please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.